This episode is brought to you by Deal. Managing a global team is complex. Deal makes it simpler with payroll, HR, IT, and compliance, all in one place. That's why over 35,000 businesses trust Deal to hire, pay, and manage teams worldwide. See how Deal works at deal.com/Adrian Tan to learn more. That's DEEL.com/ADRIANTAN. Deal, your forever people platform.
It was so painful to just do a 3 months long internship. There was no way I'm going to spend the next 30 years being in a career that would not feed me, that I will not thrive in, and I will not find any relevance. I feel every window, every life stage, you have opportunities. It's just about a sort of a mix and match of like risk versus reward. When you're young, your credibility is low, your proof is low, then you got to work harder and more creatively.
Hey Benjamin, welcome to the show.
Hey, Adrian, thanks for having me on your show.
For people who are new to you, how would you introduce yourself?
For me, I think how I would usually introduce to the audience is what I do great at is helping people to discover and to amplify their inner story and brilliance, both offline and online. And how I do so is really to help people nail down all the major speaking engagements, communications, contacts in the in-person professional context, to even as a social media and branding coach online. How do you take your stories, your brilliance, to put it out there into the big bad world so that the right people can discover you, choose you, as well as give you opportunities?
What you're currently doing is really slightly different from when I first know of you and when we first met. Could you help us to understand how has that journey went through for you?
The journey has, well, I say largely still stayed the same, but I think when I first got to know you, I was working out as the offline part communications training. I was helping my clients to go to the different rooms and contexts to really be comfortable, competent, and authentic when you are speaking and presenting to audiences. I think somewhere along about 6 to 7 years ago, the opportunities came knocking on my door where I could serve the life insurance industry. So if you think about it as an industry vertical, I started to center a lot on the life insurance space in Asia. And what that gave me was really a lot of opportunities to work with agents on the ground, to even consult companies on the national level. And that gave rise to my whole entire body of work on online personal branding, online presence building. But I would still say that, what I do is really communications, because the part of us being in Asia as Asians are that we're never taught to talk about ourselves, to say great things about ourselves, to even attract people based on our work and our narratives. So from the online perspective, I say, there's certain parallels, but that was where I basically had meandered and moved on as a trajectory from the last time I met you.
Which is quite a contrast to what you were actually formally trained in. You actually studied accounting during
Correct.
uni days. And obviously, I
Yeah.
would imagine back then, the idea was to become an accountant.
Correct.
Bring us back in time. What shifted to lead you down this path?
In 2012, I graduated from Singapore Management University, studied accounting, and I had offered to join a Big Four career, a Big Four corporation, to pursue my job as back then one of the finance and accounting professional. I turned that job down because back then it was that simple conclusion. I went through a tax internship, and that tax internship was so painful, such that every day during lunchtime and after lunchtime, I'll go to the toilet. I'll sit there for about 15 to 20 minutes. I'll press this acupuncture point, because that helps you to stay awake. And then after that, I'll be sort of gulping down cups of coffee. And what I realized back then at the juncture was that if it was so painful to just do a 3 months long internship, there was no way I'm going to spend the next 30 years being in a career that would not feed me, that I will not thrive in, and I will not find any relevance. So that was really the simple conclusion. So I went to sales because I also wanted to start out on my own. But back then, as an introvert, as someone with very little to no corporate experience, I asked myself, who will buy me and how do I sell myself? So that 1 year of a bit like a tutelage and training under my 2 American bosses helped me to understand the corporate world, how they buy, the buying cycle, down to different stakeholder, like multi-state selling, multi-stakeholder selling. And then after 1 year, I started out on my own practice, went from a solopreneur, and about 6 years into a solopreneur, I started to expand and to hire. And because I do a lot of social media and brand coaching, I realized that, it's really painful. This whole social media marketing job is a job in itself. And if I ask my clients to sometimes, edit their CapCut video, write script, post on like multiple platforms, watch statistics and metrics, it's a lot of work. So that also gave rise to me scaling and hiring people. So now we have a team of 8 that shredded across Philippines and Indonesia, where we do end-to-end social media as well as brand management. And our whole goal is really to create icons and authority in Asia, so that, when the people think of their hashtag top of mind. So that's already the brand name and positioning we are trying to hold in the whole of the work we do.
Especially in an Asian context, it would probably be quite challenging for you to tell your parents that you've decided to take the unconventional path. How was that conversation like? How long did that inner dialogue perhaps even went through for you?
It will start months before and also years after. And then years after, as an introvert, we will start to think of what's the best case scenario, what's the norm case scenario, what's the worst case scenario. And I think that's the bit of being introvert that most people also don't realize, because we tend to be a lot more deliberate, more pensive, and more reflective. So for me, I think there's a few ways to look at it. I mean, one was that my parents couldn't control me. I was quite a rebel anyway. So like, for example, even during accounting school, I was this near to being a dropout already, because I felt so trapped. Like I was doing accounting, like the studies, and to all accountants who are listening, really, like, there's no offense I'm trying to create. It's really, that's not my cup of tea. I just couldn't thrive. I was in like, what's that, like basic accounting class. The person to the left and right, they always can balance a cash flow statement. I would always have that missing $1, $5, 20 cents. I ask myself, like, we all came into the same university and same program. Why can they do it, but why am I such a retard? And at that time, I was really like, I went all the way to the School of Accountancy, the dean, to say I want to get a change. The long story short, I couldn't get a change. So anyway, that episode showed that I was the kind of character that usually I'm not too sure whether it's a good thing or not. I never really sought permission from my parents about kind of my big career moves, because they also know that I seem to have a mind of my own. I think the second slice for me as an introvert with the internal dialogue was that it was very helpful, because it then helped me to think. But obviously, to the introverts listening, we tend to have also the tendency to ruminate, to overthink, and to catastrophize our thinking. So I also back then also had like some very dark moments and dark days to say, wow, like, can I actually make it or not? I think things went up, work out for the better. So to sum up, like, my response, it's a whole process of internal review, internal consultation. Then I'll just let my parents know what was my career plans, and I'll tell them like what's my worst case scenario. Like, for example, in the next 1 year, if I don't get a good income, I probably can always go back to my job, right? It's always there. So that, I think, give them a bit of assurance. And then afterwards, when I did well, I took them on like paid trips. I flew them on business class. They more or less, in Chinese, they let go, and they say, oh, this guy onto something, right? Yeah.
And of course, go back to a job 1 year later, you still can press your acupuncture point. The acupuncture point still works.
Correct. I can continue pressing my acupuncture point, and I was like, every day was very painful. And one of the things I think about career is people tend to, I think, in my opinion, overthink career as well. So I asked myself, back then, again, with all due respect to the places I did internships and work at, I asked myself, if 10, 15, 20 or 25 years later, if I work as hard, would I want to trade roles and seats with the person across me? And the answer for me was no, because, like, for example, for the work that they did, for what I found out or discovered, the sort of like packages were, the rewards were, the kind of environment that they will have to check in, check out, the kind of clients they're working with, the kind of problems that they were solving, all that was no for me. So I think that was a very simple litmus test as to whether this career, this path was meant for you or not. For me, it was clearly a big no for me.
With that, you jump into something even more scary, which is the unconventional path of doing your own thing. The first year must be quite tough.
As much as I saw myself as a rebel, but if it's not so much of a paradox, I'm also a very calculated rebel. So my first job out of accounting school was my sales job. And my sales job actually paid me a very, very low basic with commissions for the sales that I was being able to close. So on some months, I actually was very thankful. I made like 5-figure salary months. So it was quite good money as a 24, 25 years old. And I still recall back then, if I will measure my take home versus my friends in accounting school or going to accounting careers, I was probably like making on some good months, 2x, 2.5x even. But obviously the downside is I don't close any deals, were also very low. And at that point in time, my bosses were very liberal and Angmo, the American bosses. They said, Ben, you can do anything you want on the side, just so long there's no conflict of interest. So for me, how does the calculated rebelliousness come in? Was that I set a rule for me to start up on my own, which is whatever I earn on the side has to equalize my day job average. And it has to be continually 3 months. So for example, if first month I equalize, let's say I earn like 5K on the day job, I have to make 5K. So that's like month 1. Month 2, I have to equalize. If month 3, I fall below, I reset the counter. So the reason why I did that was that I want to make sure that I have enough of assurance, enough of a track record, enough of a client demand. Then I will just, throw in the letter to tender. So thankfully, I hit that at about 1 year mark, and then I left. But insofar when and after I left, it wasn't also a bed of roses. So I think for most solopreneurs out there, one of the things I was very conscious and thankful for was really cash flow and financial management. So I set myself a very strict budget. So thanks to what I learned in accounting school, every day I only had like $15 Sing dollars in budget. So $5 for breakfast, $5 lunch, and $5 dinner. And back then I wasn't doing intermittent fasting. So if I did, I can save a bit more money for breakfast, towards lunch and dinner. But that was how I sort of kept myself lean, but also go towards the upside. So it's about like year on year, the good clients, which clients pay you better, how do you create more value, how do you sell one, ready you sell two, how you sell two, you sell three more, etc. So it was just really that slow grind of getting yourself known in the market for what you can deliver, and then getting that right clients to buy you consistently and constantly. That worked out for me.
And fortunately, your issue is just off by 20 cents, $1, not by $50, $100.
Yeah.
That will mess up your budgeting.
Exactly. Otherwise, totally, I can't even do my statements. Oh, for the fun fact is right now, I have a full-fledged trained accountant to do my accounts. But at least having that oversight, the knowledge is always helpful. So I think even for solopreneurs or full-fledged business owners, we cannot outsource financials to anyone or a single staff. You got to know your numbers, and I had to learn this from a very painful point of view as well, through a few kind of like separate incidents.
To any future accountants of Benjamin listening, you cannot pull a fast one on him. He knows his stuff.
Yeah. Adequately, of course.
And how do you even decide then when you first started and when you got to know each other, you were primarily doing a lot of speaking, public speaking. How was that even an angle to begin with? What made you decide that is something you want to pursue?
Over the years, things crystallized a bit more, you see. So like back then, the context was that I went into speaking and coaching through a life coaching program. And that life coaching program sort of gave us that belief or that self-motivation to start up on our own. But it was ironic because it's a life coaching organization. So if I went out there to become a life coach, I was also very practical, as well as thinking, who would buy life coaching back then, right? As a young 25 years old, and in that era, life coaching is not like in 2025, there's therapy, there's counseling, it's very celebrated back then. So if I went back in time, that was 2013 or 14, like life coaching is not something that's talked about. So addressable market is small. Number two, I was 25, 26, 27 years old with saggy hair. Who want to buy someone like that? And then thirdly, likewise, with so little life experience, why the hell would people pay good money to get me to coach them on their life? So how my trajectory into communications coaching was really because I started out being a bit more comfortable with speaking at about like early 20s. And I said, hey, if an introvert like myself, like a bully victim, former serial bully victim like myself, could carry himself well on stage, to not be nervous, to be able to hold attention, to create like engaging moments, to create value, maybe I could do that for other people. So that really was how I went in, because I felt that was I would say the most strategic and easiest entry point. I cannot compete head to head with other people with what they have, you see. So my other competitors and peers could be they could be expats. They could be people who worked in, let's say, McKinsey and Bain for like 10, 15, 20 years. I have nothing. I've been till today. I have zero corporate experience. I haven't worked a single day in a big corporation. So for me, it was really about hacking my credibility, hacking my proof into it. And then 10 years into it, people don't question me at all, because I have the whole list of quality clientele. I trained the central bank in Singapore. I've been flown into Tokyo to work with fintech founders on communications. I've been flown into Riyadh and Saudi Arabia to teach them about personal branding and communications. You see, it just gets easier. But the thing is, it was hell as hard at the start. But once you overcome that, you build the market traction, people validate you, people choose you, and you can deliver, then it becomes easy.
How long was that hard period for you?
The first 3 to 5 years was typically a lot more challenging. I had to buffer my solopreneur income with a lot of other side work. So for example, I was doing freelance writing on the side. I was also doing like freelance emceeing on the side. I'll host people weddings to get paid. I'll host like fun or kind of like events, professional to semi-professional events just to get the income going. So I think for different people going to solopreneur, because your podcast is for solopreneurs also, people who wants to have no more bosses, right? I think it's also to be very cognizant of where your starting points are. I feel every window, every life stage, you have opportunities. It's just about a sort of a mix and match of like risk versus reward. So I told myself, circling back to one of your earlier questions on the inner conversation, my inner conversation was that back then, as a mid-20s, I don't have much commitments. I was still living rent-free with my mom and dad. The only thing that's looming in front of me is I need to marry my fiance and to have the diamond ring and then go to PTO. So I told myself or asked myself, if I don't take a risk back then when my risk was so, in fact, my obligations were so low, my risk premium was so high, then how would it look like in my 30s and 40s? Right? So that for me was how I jump. But as I jump, I also know that when you're young, your credibility is low, your proof is low, then you got to work harder and more creatively. So that would be a very different conversation if someone who's in the 40s or 50s actually jump into solopreneur. You have a better base, but maybe, your competition kind of dynamics very, very different.
I read a book by the comedian Jimmy O Yang. It's called How to American. And while he was actually shaping up to be a known comedian before he got his big break in, I think, Silicon Valley, he was also doing a lot of side stuff. Besides the typical stuff, he was even driving Uber just to make ends meet. So those are things that I've seen many has to go through in order to pursue what they think is right for them. But to that, 3 to 5 years is indeed a very long time to finally crack it. And I'm also seeing a lot of people who are currently within that 3 to 5 version of their phase. How do you know that it is still the right thing to continue in?
First and foremost, like whatever we share in this kind of like podcasts or conversations, can be seemingly taken as thinly cloaked advice, but advice is never meant to be universal. So instead of like saying, no, you should quit, you should sort of like pull through or pull on. It can be true, it can be false as well. So I read this book by, I can't recall the author, was about it's called Seth Godin, DIP, D-I-P, right? So he talks about actually quitting fast, quitting well, quitting early. It's actually a good strategy. So a lot of people also get sold by this, entrepreneurial dream, solopreneur dream, or you can be on a beach sipping pina colada and then making like income through your laptop. I think people love that dream, but when rubber hits the road, then they got to ask themselves, is this dream something that can still pay the bills? Is this dream something that will take away their sort of like the ability to even continue dreaming? I.e. to say, are they going to be thrown back to reality? So for me, I think what gave me that faith and clarity was first, that regular check-in. So I had very sound mentors who in the field to always have my back. So I would turn to them and say, hey, Mr. Mentor, Madam Mentor, I did exactly what you shared with me already. Why am I still not getting the gig? So having people who were like 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ahead of you, then that was like my unfair leverage. And I again saw that as a youth benefit, because when you're young, you can make stupid mistakes and you can get away a bit. You ask stupid questions and people think, oh, that's because you're young. So I made full use of that. So I had a lot of mentors who were wiser than me. So that gave me clarity. I think the second thing was that I think year on year, if you're doing it right, if clients are returning, so I really believe that in terms of when value is delivered, then the right people come. So I felt that as I hone on that craft, I was starting to see, good interesting signs. Like for example, I was getting bigger contracts. I was getting regional contracts. I was regional opportunities as well. So that helped to play to my belief that this can be done. And then I think thirdly is I share this like career or life planning kind of framework, which is shared by one of my mentors as well. It's called the 4P theory. So the first P was, proficiency. So I asked myself, is this track I want to continue? Yes, because I think I am much better at communicating ideas versus doing statements or sort of like running through analysis. Right? Because that wasn't my cup of tea. Doing accounting, I felt stupid. I felt no matter how hard I tried to compensate, I wasn't in the flow. So can I be proficient at working with people, translating ideas? Good. Then the second P is profits. So I asked myself, would there be continual upside? I'm not making money now, but can I make money in the future? Are there people making the kind of money that I want to make? So the answer is yes. So the question is, I went to interview all those people and I said, how do you do so? How would you advise me? So that's the second part. And then slowly but surely, you increase your fee point year on year. And then the third thing is the passion as well as purpose. So passion comes from the root word in Latin called pati, right? Which is to suffer. So a lot of people think passion is like at Clarke Quay, you play music, in cine leisure to attract audience. But I ask myself, if all things are hard, what is the one thing that I'm still willing to be sort of like going through a lot of hardship? Was really spending the time preparing for my work, engagements, and also, going through, like for example, you tell a joke on stage, people don't laugh, or you teach a class, you don't get the attention, you don't create the shift, the value, or clients don't buy you. All these were the things I would still continually be willing to endure the toughness and hardness on that. And last but not least, then the purpose, which is whether that feeds you. So I think that kept me going on for the first 3 to 5 years, you see. I would have people writing emails, sending me messages who say, hey, like based on what simple ideas you shared, based on how you were a bully victim and you found your voice, I managed to nail that speech. I managed to speak much better. I managed to like get a good job, a new opportunities from the youth, from the mid-level senior executives that I work with. So that kept me going through, you see. So all of this kind of like ideas kept me going through and pushing through the 3 to 5 years mark. But that's to say, like now in my phase as an entrepreneur, I'm still in that new 3 to 5 years window, and I'm constantly checking, can I still push through this? But it's better and easier right now because you see, I tell myself, what is risk taking? Risk taking is if I fail at this, I still can come back to my current base plan, which is being a solo speaker, which still from a lifestyle perspective is pretty comfortable.
To your point about the passion part, you have to imagine what's the worst day that could be for you and ask yourself if you're willing to tolerate that worst day on a consistent basis. If you still are, then that will also give you signals that probably you're on the right track. And I think for you, especially so, you are the captain of your own ship, but you have all these advisors telling you, correct, the coordinates is still correct. Just continue to move forward. And that was really helpful. Well, did that come instinctively for you at an early stage to seek out mentors or advisors during the journey of your life to give you all this advice?
I have my answer, but I want to be playful to circle back to the last question though. Because like Adrian, I always see you as someone who's like career and wisely. So could I also ask you, like, for example, we talk about like when do we persist, when do you quit? For you, I'm just curious, like when do you tell yourself this thing is not going to work out? What is your yardstick or your mental model when it talks about quitting? Yeah, I come back to that.
My mental model, well, out of the 4P, I think perhaps because I'm at a life stage where the profit is probably the largest P out there, because I have 4 kids and all that. So I think I put on a very pragmatic lens and give myself a
runway,
a very staunch target. So if by this time I don't hit this particular target, then I think that's it. Although having said that, the target could be a bit stretch along the way.
Yes.
But I think that by and large, and also I think at the same time that the passion part really resonate with me, because there are certain things which I believe I can do and I can do well, but you ask me to do every day, I'd rather kill myself. I'd rather put a fork in my eye. So those are things that will have to come together for you to find that overlap before asking yourself whether it makes sense or not.
I love that. So on that point, in terms of like, sort of reaching out to people who's more like a senior advisor, I think it has always been in me. Like even during university years, because I know my GPA all tanked already, because the thing is, life is all games. And one of the games that I didn't play very well was my academic games at university. So when you start to get a few C+, C-, D+, your whole GPA, your grade point average will totally be tanked already. So no matter how many more A+ you're going to get, it's a no cure. You're going to be flatline already. So at that point, like maybe year 3, I realized that if this game is going to be screwed, I must well go and find out more about live game. So back then, instead of like going for classes only, I started to ask my professors out on coffee. So it's kind of funny because, as I have coffee in Kofu, our kind of like kopi jiang, people walk by and say like, yeah, he's talking to the professor and it seems like having a good time. So from my peers' point of view, they couldn't quite understand like, how is that possible? Like how and why would you ask a professor out? But I was already like sort of like reaching out to them and say, hey, like what kind of career do you do? I went to the LinkedIn. I said, oh, you used to be Big Four, you used to do tech, you used to do banking. What are some lessons you've learned? So for me, it's always been interesting as well as comfortable for me to reach out to people who are smarter, wiser, more experienced than me, as a way to ethically leech from their experience, but also to give me perspective, you see, because I think that's for me a life hack. Why would I want to go and do it myself for the next 10 years to discover? Yes, certain things you would have to discover your own truth. But why do I have to discard everything when I have so many good role models in my space? So that has always been part of my DNA.
When I was still doing my recruitment business, I was going through a due diligence as the company was almost acquired, and the CEO came down and he was asking me, what to write through some of the issues, the ups and downs. And I thought I gave a smart aleck answer. Oh, I will Google for my answer. And he said, when recession comes, Google will not help you out. And true enough, when recession came, we were knocked hard because we did not know what to do. If I had some mentor, some advice back then, I think that would have things done in a very differentiated manner, which of course is something that I guess for many of us, regardless of whether we are small business owners or solopreneurs, there would be a lot of ups in your case, as you have mentioned earlier on, but there's also a lot of mistakes that we made along the way. What are some mistakes or early failures in your journey that has guided or led you to later success?
In an earlier podcast, I shared about how I when I was much earlier on as a solopreneur, quote unquote entrepreneurial kind of context, I drank a lot of entrepreneurial Kool-Aid. I went to a lot of motivation seminars, like brainwashed. And whenever an opportunity comes to you, you just say yes. So I said yes to a training assignment where I had to train 8 Australian CEOs who were running 8 9-figure companies. And when they came into the room, I felt that, wow, they were sizing me up. Young Asian guys, and what the hell could he teach us? And I really bought into this like inadequacies, all those like, I'm not good enough. The long and short, I sort of screwed up that gig. And then I went to one of the CEOs who was a sponsor of that training. And I said, I'm going to do this because it doesn't make sense for me to accept the fees or payback for a training that was not done or not done well. So I had to write a refund check to refund the X thousands that was earmarked for the training. And there was always one incident that reminded me that sometimes it's not just about saying yes. I think there's merit in terms of saying yes readily to life challenges, and challenges will really shape and prepare you. But there are also sometimes whereby a bit of healthy dose of reality check. Saying no sometimes takes also a lot of courage. Saying no also sometimes takes you to be very clear of where you stand, at which levels are you capable of delivering and for whom you can deliver. And then when you say no in a very empowered and clear fashion, then you can then put your energies to people who are saying yes to you well. So if that makes sense, that really helped me to shape me in terms of being a bit more resilient in terms of going after that opportunities. So case in point, now I'm doing a lot of work in the life insurance scene, but there will always be lures. There will always be like, hey, like Ben, like you're doing so much good work for life insurance. Why don't you do this for our industry? Another use case. But for me, I pretty much stuck to my guns for the past 6 to 7 years in this one space. And I wouldn't say I have totally arrived, but at least in my chosen domain and space, I have that go-to kind of quote unquote authority perception. I have that level of awareness in Asia level for life insurance space, and I'm going towards the bigger size deals that I know if any entrant were to come up like today, tomorrow, next year, next month, they don't have this kind of like moat that I have built. So for me, it was really the most painful experiences in the past when I loaded up too much on my plate, and I said yes to everything. Then now I think the beauty in life is for me in this season is to really be very judicious to say everything I say yes to, I need to refocus, be able to deliver.
I went through the same thing as well when I first started this journey, which is about 3 years old. When I first started, I just grabbed whatever is on the table. I had 2 teaching assignments, I had 3 other assignments, and along the way I realized I hate teaching. I hate teaching entirely. So it was really painful because you cannot just teach one class and drop out. You have to continue the entire term and serve it out.
And the students and the
that is very painful. Yeah, but of course, having said that, I think when I ask myself, why did I take on all that? I guess in a way, it's also the sense of inadequacy at that point. If I don't take on, then what's going to happen? Would I have more?
Yep,
So those things would constantly hit you. So having said that,
correct.
I think also reminded me of this book or this article that I read. So before you hit 40s, you should say yes to everything, and after you hit 40s, you should say no to most of the things. So basically, by then you should have a sense of what you like, what you don't like, and that is where you should be a bit more discerning to what you said. You have to really gain clarity on that. And I think Derek Sivers have also said it before, and even
Yeah.
turned it into a book. It's either a hell yeah or no.
Hell yeah or no. That the Chinese wisdom also taught us something which is 三十而立，四十而不惑, right? So I may be butchering this, but 三十而立 is when you're 30s, you should start to put the sticks into the ground and start to be serious, start to make like more guided and accurate bets in terms of your life, trying to make a mark, trying to be a bit more definitive. But it's only when 四十而不惑, which is 40s, maybe you're a bit more enlightened, you're not so swayed, you're more so like self-doubt. Sometimes you see like the doubt comes from outside and also inside, right? So I can imagine like 四十而不惑 is, you are at that place whereby you've really earned it. The market space, your context don't doubt you. But it's also for you to have a sense of clarity that, the things that you do doesn't come from a space of inadequacy, uncertainty, or doubt. You're really freaking clear about why you do what you want to do. So Chinese wisdom has also a bit of like that phasal approach to clarity.
Yeah, I don't think that 30 or 40 are hard numbers.
Exactly.
For people who may be
Yeah.
a bit later in life, of course, with the gain wisdom, you definitely can figure things out much faster.
Correct. This is just good guides and good mental models to life. And in the absence of anything, a model is better than nothing. But as you consider different models, then I think it's about one's personal kind of like awareness and also discretion. You shouldn't be too hard on yourself. And I always remind myself, even though, like, for example, I am on my own journey, that there are younger speakers coming up and I say, wow, like, I admire the courage, I admire the energy. And then my wife would say, you were like that when you're 20s or so. It's just that, now younger in this era called social media, TikTok, they're everywhere. But you also, when you started your work, I'm sure your folks and your peers in the 40s, like, who the hell are you, etc. So you see, this tendency to always compare and look outwards will always be there. So I think it's that remembrance that we should always have this internal yardstick with us and to ourselves, and what does it mean for us. So that's for me to always remind ourselves.
One thing I appreciate of what you're doing right now is to put yourself in this very specific niche, because you're not just doing what you're doing, but you're doing it primarily for the insurance industry, and specifically, more on the advisory side, which basically put you into a category of one or very few. Similarly for me, for my marketing stuff, I'm doing it just for HR tech, again, category of one. I am curious to find out, how did you decide the insurance sector is the right sector for you to focus on?
It's really dependent on context. So like your starting point. I had the privilege of choice also then because I was doing speech and communications training for 6-7 years. In all honesty, money was good, comfortable lifestyle income, but it's no longer, super big contracts. It's like workshop by workshop. So it's still a constant grind. And the whole life insurance kind of work came to me by surprise accident. In fact, before branding and after communications, there's this middle slice that I sometimes always will share. I was like still a Gen Y back then, and back then it was hot on the conversation about like multi-generational kind of conversations. And I had very limited success back then, trying to get enough paid work. And I started out doing just one full day training for AIA in Singapore. So AIA is one of 3 insurers. But the funny thing was that the whole training was okay in my own standards, and I documented that and I put it on YouTube. I still recall I was holding this like very shaky kind of like selfie stick, so it was so not stabilized, and I uploaded it on YouTube. And I think the following year, I received an email and then later a call from another big 3 insurance company called Prudential. And they said, hey, we love to invite you to Osaka in Japan to speak to a group of leaders. And then back then I was like, wait a minute, like why, how, what? Then they say, oh, we saw your video of the AIA. So if you treat AIA, then maybe we would like to consider you. But okay, fine. Is this paid? Yes. It's like, okay, good, business class. Okay, so that was my first kind of like full-fledged international gig. So I said yes to that. And how I did the clarity of the angle, the work that I was supposed to train is they say, can you teach us how to engage the younger market? And I said, okay, how about like selling to millennials? But then they told me this group were leaders, they don't need to sell, they need to recruit. So how do we recruit younger people? Oh, social media, branding. So in a sense, my first kind of like big international gig crystallized what I want. And the very funny thing till today, which I still don't know, is after I did that like a half-day gig in Osaka with this group of leaders, 200 plus of them, 8 different countries, was that after the paid gig, the CEO of insurance in Asia came to me and said, like, we want to sign you on exclusive. And I couldn't, for the sanity of me, like distill or make sense of that, because I was in my early 30s. They want to give me an exclusive contract to train, consult, and speak to 8 different countries in their umbrella. So that really was my career J-curve, my big break. And that was how I started. And then the long and short, why I still continue is really practical factors as a service provider, as a trainer, consultant. They pay well, they have volume of work. And most importantly, I think for me, they're the group of somewhat misunderstood people that would do a lot well with branding, because, the sales industry in general is one where there's very low trust and low perception. So I've met so many good people who are secret or invisible agents. So if they can really do well to truck their work online, attract the better clients online, it is my belief that the good agents should overshadow the not so good players and then have a net benefit to this whole industry and whole space in Asia.
To some extent, perhaps your earlier gigs in sales also help a lot. As much as, of course, as a solopreneur, you're constantly selling.
Yeah.
But your day job back before you started this unconventional path was in sales. So in a way, you also resonate with what you're doing. I'm very curious to understand a bit on your target audience. What are some of the common wrong ways that you're seeing in how they market or sell themselves?
I train financial advisors across Asia. And usually in this space and context, the only reason why they want to sort of put themselves online, because attention is sometimes good, but also very, very bad, because you never know like what kind of nasty feedback or responses you will get. So the only reason why they want to do so are in fact 2 reasons. One is to sell more policies, so to increase like the client acquisition, or number 2, to recruit more. So in this whole frame of perspective and the kind of value they want to get, typical problems or challenges is my right. From the start of the whole life cycle or the action cycle is a lack of belief in themselves, in the process. Like, why should I do on social media? I'm a bit too young, I'm a bit too old, I'm not like, I don't have enough like corporate experience to go on LinkedIn, or I'm not so fun to be on Instagram and TikTok. So there's a lot of like a basket of limiting self-beliefs that about them on the platform, about the whole process, in their work even. Sometimes, they could be 5, 10, 20 years in the industry, but if you ask them to talk about their work and online, there's also that whole imposter syndrome. So I always scratch my head to say, like, if you as a 20-year-old agent with the CFP, the CLU, the CHFC, you still feel not qualified, then who will be qualified? You see? So that's part. Then the second part is in terms of the executionary stuff, which is to put themselves out on social. So it's also like being, 1, clear of your brand, 2, your target audience. So sometimes if they want to target like more well-endowed clients, but I see themselves maybe putting all their content energy in another platform. So it's a lot of like very first principles, first fundamental questions being off. So then the third part would be, if they are able to harness attention, they don't have a very effective kind of nurturing and back-end process to convert attention online to sales offline. They don't qualify well, they don't have qualification process. When people meet them, it's like lukewarm, and they cannot convert as well. So it's a lot of energies put online that cannot become clients or customers. So I think for me, why I have become increasingly a lot more relevant is, for me as a solo brand, I had to go through all of that, right? Like self-doubt, to putting myself out on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and then like having people to just like random spew like not so good comments on my thread, on my post, to later meeting a lot of clients, but I feel so high and low and dry. Like, why I push for like my training fees to be X thousand, and then you tell me 2/3 X, half X. So there's a lot of like dissonance. So I had to go back to drawing board, review, reframe, and do it all again. So the problems are my right. And if you look at it from the whole like kind of action cycle, Those are the things that I typically help my students, whether in big group training workshops to the keynotes like one to mega many or to one-to-one.
The world of insurance sales has really evolved a lot.
It has.
Last time you were still, let's just park ourselves in front of MRT station,
Yeah,
hijack
yeah,
some
yeah.
innocent bystander.
That was me.
That is
My
so-
first agent was a pretty lady at the MRT, and I bought my first savings vest because of her.
I must admit on camera, same thing. And that was during NS.
Yes.
And that was like 50%
Same.
of my allowance.
Oh, okay, I wasn't that aggressive, but I probably only at 25%.
But it has, of course, evolved a fair bit. I think even nowadays, if you see a pretty lady at the MRT, you
Yeah.
probably would just take a long detour
Yeah.
because you know something is up lah.
Thanks to social media, thanks to how we have so many memes, so many kind of like friendly jibes about like the sales profession in general, people become increasingly sensitized. And I say financial literacy in 2025 is vastly more improved than maybe in 10 years or 15 years ago. So now you have Reddit, now you have like Financial Coconut, now you have like Seedly. So Seedly is a client of mine. I coach the founding team for their annual like personal finance festival. So it's crazy, you see, they congregate 5,000 people and on a weekend, and it's a paid ticket. So it's not free. It's like people pay money to learn about personal finance, 5,000 people on a Saturday. So I think the whole rise of financial literacy all the more create a lot more demand and need for people to, especially the financial practitioners, to put themselves in the right good capacity, state, and positioning. Because there's also another insurgent of like this big hoo-ha on financial influencers or finfluencers. So people who don't have a license and don't want to have a license or cannot have a license, but they are using their lifestyle, their ways on social media to influence people to go on trading platforms, to buy certain products, to do certain things. So these two are the forces that I think are going to shape how financial education is going to be changed on the B2C level.
For the longest time, you were one-man show. And just like myself right now.
Correct.
I was wondering how did you decide that you need to start looking at a team? And was that an easy decision for you?
It is never an easy decision. It's still never been. And I think for a lot of, some business owners, don't get me wrong, some business owners are all made differently. So some business owners really have the natural talent as well as heart for growing people, developing people. I think if you're the kind of archetype in DNA, then scaling, having more people is naturally a great thing because you enjoy people. So for me, my day job, ironically, is facing a lot of people. So I don't want to encumber myself with more people management issues, you see. The difference between me working with people in a class or a workshop or coaching is that after I fix their problems, they're off. But for my employees is that, I'm going to sort of be responsible in one part or the other for their problems all year round, 365 days. So I would say in key highlights, the start was really out of necessity. So when I received that big kind of like a speaking and training contract with my client back then, they told me like, Ben, you need to get a PA. I said, okay, fine. And like I've been procrastinating, but they gave me the permission, so I hired. And I think when you start to have people to offload or to shoulder the kind of stresses that you have, like for example, in things that you don't like to. So like for example, back then we don't have Calendly, we don't have all the apps. Wow, it's tedious. You need to organize like flight schedules, which hotel to stay, reimbursements, invoices. Having my first full-time hire was really a godsend. So I still recall, her name is Akida, if you're listening. Like, Akida totally sort of gave sanity to me. And that also gave me that insight into like how if solopreneurs never learn to let go, then you will never be able to receive, right? So it's just a zero-sum game, right? The more things you hoard on your hand, whether by choice or circumstances, then your hands will be full. Then you cannot have the mind space or mind share to take on more things. So when Akida, my full-time PA, took on a lot of things, then I realized I was actually performing better. When I arrived to gigs, I don't have a lot of mental load and mental stress. So that was still like solopreneur with one. Stayed for quite long. And then that gave me confidence. But then after that, it was like about 3 to 4 years ago, I decided to scale a bit more into like my current headcount 8, including me. And I think this stage is still the same. I don't think I'm naturally liking to manage people or people's problems. But one part started to grow, like maybe because I'm a bit more lao, I'm a bit more older. I realized that there's a bit of like strange joy of working with people and then helping them to also get better in their work, like developing. So the people development quotient has begun to grow on me, and I wouldn't say it's fully yet, but I learned to appreciate being a business owner is really very, very onerous. you don't just have to make sure that people are sustainable today, but also like in the future for the firm, for them to stay with you, for them to have a talent progression with you, and all these other things, you see. So I would say it's a bit of like a good stress for me that I feel that in this season, if I'm able to weather and journey through and make them better people and then help the company, and then the company helps more people. And if I can go through this whole life cycle, it's going to make me a better person net. And I come from this whole thinking again, if I never give myself a chance to scale and to grow, even if it means failing, but if I never give myself a chance, would I regret this in my 40s and 50s? So the answer is probably yes. So I just go ahead. What's the worst case? I go back to a solo one-man show with a VA, which I still do well. So I think for me, again, I talk about risk in terms of, what can you fall back on? So if I can fall back on this, then maybe that should give me the wings and courage.
So constantly looking at ways as a solopreneur to move up your fallback plan so that there's huge buffer.
Yeah.
And I think it also touches on your earlier point where you mentioned about having mentors, advisor and all that.
Yeah.
You are currently in that life stage where actually mentors themselves enjoy giving advice, guiding younger people to grow, to groom. And I think that in itself would shed a lot of mystic for many people who are like, I don't dare to talk to that guy to ask him for his mentorship or ask her for a mentorship.
Yeah.
Actually, mentors themselves, they are just waiting for you to ask.
I wouldn't say like dime a dozen, but mentors are always there because again, if we don't look at like, for example, mentors as people who must have arrived at a certain life stage, right? You must have exited your business. You must have, like, for example, have 500 mil sitting in your account. You see, mentors is a dynamic equation and mentoring is also a dynamic equation. So this person may be still, like trying to figure out, but at his stage, at his level, he got a lot more or she had a lot more bandwidth and energies and perspective to give to you. That's already a good mentoring shift already. So mentoring doesn't have to be, like sort of setting a super high benchmark of who can be a mentor. Like even these days, I want to say this, like even AI, ChatGPT, you can develop mentoring kind of like self-counseling, self-modules as well. So there's really no denying that first, there's no resource out there. You can even talk to AI. Then number two is, can you then make sense and then just like feed it forward? So again, if you're tending to be introvert, sometimes that self-talk is helpful, but then again, self-rumination, overly harsh critic, and sort of like dwelling in not so positive or dark moments in your life may not forward you. So it's also that belief that in you seeking external resource, you shift yourself outwards, let action and let life roll you forward.
For people who are too shy to seek out mentors, maybe at the very least ask ChatGPT.
Correct.
I think that would be a good start.
You can literally frame your custom GPT kind of self-counseling, self-therapy module out there. I've seen people in the US do that. So it's kind of crazy.
Last question before we wrap things up. If you could go back in time, what advice would you give your younger self who is looking to start out in this field?
I told myself this, which is like to care less and to listen inwards more. So what I mean by that is a lot of times we are very, very, at least for me in my earlier stages of career, I was very preoccupied with how people thought about me, what people think, and where, and there was always a preoccupation with what should be the industry right. Okay. And that resulted me in this obsession when, again, I am not ashamed to share in the earlier stages, because I was never a natural, a big stage kind of speaker. Put me in usual classrooms, I can ha, I can entertain, engage people. But being a keynote speaker is one of the, again, in our world, the highest mountain you can climb, because keynote speakers are paid a lot of money. Why? Because they are supposed to wear many hats and do a lot of work, 60 minutes, 45 minutes, 30 minutes. They have to engage people, they entertain people, make people laugh, make people think, make people act. You got to like create this momentum of energy and shift for a lot of people. And back then, I felt that there was only that few industry right. And I was so obsessed in copying everything, how they start a speech, what kind of activities they run, how they start to talk. I was mimicking everything down to even how they wear, what kind of suit colors they did, you see. So I was carrying a lot outside and I didn't really care about who I was inside. And I think one point whereby I just realized that the more I copy, it doesn't feel me. I'm just trying to be like a carbon copy of that speaker. So when I finally decided to say care less, just listen inward, like what is my truth about this topic I want to talk about? So like what's my truth about personal branding is that I used to be bullied a lot, and then now I learned my courage to communicate, and this is what I want to put myself out there. You like it or not? If you like it, choose me. If you don't like it, too bad. Then the world and the work started to change, you see. So I had audience who come to me and then say like, wow, you should have shared this long ago. Like, we didn't know this about you. Then I would say, like, that's interesting to you. I didn't know that there was any like telling my story was going to be helpful. Oh, sharing about how I close a deal was helpful. Sharing about how I do content was going to be helpful. Then I realized that, hey, actually the world just needs a lot more you. So there was recently this personal branding slash sales guru that came. His name is Chris Do. He said, the more you are, if I got it correct, the more you are, the more you'll get, or the more you'll be. The more you are, the more you'll be. Right? So I thought there was a beauty in terms of, like, again, especially in this whole spirit and context of personal branding, public speaking, putting yourself out there. It's also about really peeling all the false pretenses and then caring less, listening inwards, so that the more you'll be, then the more you will become as well in the process.
It's very tempting to put on a mask, especially when we are in the early infancy of doing something that we're so unsure
Yes.
of. When I first started my business, I didn't know how to behave as a boss. So I just referred to how I assume bosses would be. They'll be like, always bad mood lah, temperamental lah, always very cold to you. And it was so painful for me because it wasn't me at all. It's only when I finally realized, why the hell am I doing this? That I started to have better relationship with my employees and things actually got better. So tempting, but I think ultimately the battle that you're fighting out there is already quite hard. It's only going to be harder if you have to put on a mask.
Correct.
To continue whatever battle that you're trying to fight. And with that, Benjamin, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoy our conversation, and I love it that every time I meet up with you, we have so many things to discuss about. And for people who are keen to learn more about yourself and what you do, where can they go to?
I'm most active on 2 platforms, which are LinkedIn as well as on Instagram. So that's where you can find my musings about, like, how as a father struggling through fatherhood and sleepless nights now is better, to day-to-day work, documentation, to some of my insights on personal branding, communications, and what it takes for you to be an icon in your space.
I love it. All this will be in the show notes. Once again, Benjamin, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you so much, Adrian, and thanks for having me once again.